Good afternoon, good morning. Just checking that everyone can hear me okay. I'll give people a couple more minutes to join. Still people dropping in. Can someone in the chat just confirm that you can hear me okay? Okay, let's get started. If you want to pop any questions into the Q&A box or the chat, please feel free to do so. Everyone's on mute, so if you have any questions along the way, do let me know. Pop it into the Q&A box. Ideally, we'll park until the end. This webinar is recorded, so there will be a copy available afterwards through the partner portal. So you will not receive an email saying that this is a recording that's available. If you want to share this webinar with anyone, please do point them over to the Automation Anywhere partner portal, and it will be available over there as an on-demand version. Can you just quickly confirm in the chat that you can hear the audio all good? And I'll also share my screen. So gentleman just confirms that you can hear me loud and clear. Okay, perfect. Good. Thanks, Tony, for confirming that. Let's jump right into it. Okay, so welcome to Enterprise A2019 Performing Your First Installation. This is kind of like a level 200 webinar, which will require some of the prerequisites to your knowledge of the Enterprise A2019 platform and Automation Anywhere in general. The webinar is going to take roughly 35 minutes. We'll have a couple of minutes at the end, obviously, for Q&A. To give you a bit of background on myself, my name is Patrick Hosch. I'm the Director of Partner Success for Europe. And yes, you heard correct, that is Europe. It's quite late over here, or early, depending on how you take it. Unfortunately, we had a bit of a issue with our speaker today, so I'm jumping in on short notice and running this webinar. I lead the partner success team at Automation Anywhere across Europe. My background is around 13 years, over 13 years, and in the meanwhile in consulting, process management, and automation at various vendors, consultancies, and pretty much all across the globe. I've lived and worked in Australia, in Germany, now in the UK, and I'm originally from Austria. So a bit of a mix of everything, as you can probably also hear from my accent that constantly gets mistaken for South African for some reason. I've joined Automation Anywhere back in April 2019, so I'm almost due for my 1-year anniversary. Good. If there's any questions that I won't be able to answer, I'll take them away with me. I will follow them up for you. I'll follow them up offline, and I will inform also your partner success manager in your region. It's probably a bit easier than me managing all of that. In terms of the agenda today, we'll go through the installation prerequisites, a couple of pointers on what's required, what are the minimum hardware, software requirements, and what would we expect from a permission and kind of user's point of view. We'll then do a bit of a walk through the different installation screens. I think that process will be pretty straightforward. A lot of you will be familiar with that. We keep that as a screenshotty kind of walkthrough. And then we've got a short video prepared on the initial control room setup that will take you through the first steps after you've done the installation up until the point where you're basically done, and you can then start assigning your users, your licenses to the users, and set up the rules. Again, for anyone who has just joined, everyone's on mute for this webinar. So if you have any questions, please pop them in the Q&A box. I will keep an eye on them. if you want to access this recording, or any one of your teams and friends and family maybe wants to access this recording after the webinar, it's available through the partner portal. So please point people to the partner portal, or refer yourself to the partner portal, where we'll host all the different webinar recordings. All right. So first things first, what sort of the minimum requirements around hardware and software for A2019? Maybe before we get stuck into that, let's talk about a little about A2019 in general. A2019, as most of you are probably aware, is our newest iteration of the Automation Anywhere platform. It's been built with cloud first in mind. It is not a cloud-only product though, so please keep that in mind. And that's the whole point of this webinar, really, to take you through an on-premise installation of A2019. So one of the main benefits to me and to our customers and US partners always is you can install A2019 on a public cloud. There will soon be a RPA as a service offering, basically, and there is A2019 still for on-premise. So if you have customers that still want to stick their platform somewhere under their desk, not a problem with A2019. If you've worked with A2019 a little bit and had some first kind of touch points with it, you'll probably see the main difference is it's essentially browser-based. So the only kind of component that you need to install on your clients is the bot agent. That's also the first part that we're going to go through for the software requirements and hardware requirements. So the bot agent is really a little piece of software that you will download through the browser, download and install. And once you've installed that, it basically allows you during the development of a bot to record things, to access your local file system. And it also is the bit that actually runs and executes bots once you've deployed them. So from an operating system point of view, we do support Windows 10. If you want to refer to the compatibility page on the docs portal for additional supported operating systems as we add them, as we go through. Windows Server is one of the other ones that are supported, but do refer to that. I think commonly Windows 10 at the moment. One thing that you've probably heard, and this also applies to Control Room, is we're not only going to support Windows moving forward, but we'll also give you the option to have Linux support for on-premise installations. And Linux support for the Control Room is the first one to come, which will actually be added in February is the current plan. So at the end of February, in the next release, you will have support for Control Room being installed on a Linux environment. And the OS that we initially going to support here as part of most requested OS is CentOS. So if you need any more details, do get in touch around that. But back to the bot agent, from a hardware perspective, it's fairly minimal specs. Intel Core i5 with 2.6 gigahertz, 8 gig of RAM, storage 32 gig, and that's mainly due to files that you might want to process and move around. The bot agent itself is not 32 gig big, so that's a fairly small installation file actually. Linux support for the bot agent will currently is planned for Q2, end of Q2 on our end. Please do get in touch with your partner success manager to confirm those timelines, because they're obviously subject to change as we go through the development of A2019. Features might shift depending on the demand that we see with partners and customers. So keep an eye on that, but at the moment Q2 is what we're targeting for the bot agent to be available for Linux as well. So really good stuff, because not everyone wants to invest a ton of licensing fees into Windows, into Microsoft products. So on that end, you have the option to go to Linux. Control Room does require a minimum of Windows Server 2016 standard. From a processor point of view, 8-core Intel Xeon processor, 16 gig of RAM, 500 gig is the absolute minimum that we require. I do get asked a lot of questions around what if my machines, any of those, don't actually have those specs? What if my Control Room is installed on an 8 gig server? In a nutshell, you can give it a try. It's absolutely not recommended. We do have the specifications for a very good reason. That's the minimum spec for everything to run smoothly. So please stick with those minimum recommendations. On the SQL Server side of things, we do support SQL Server 2014 or newer. And obviously with Server 2016 on that as an operating system, and from a processor point of view, fairly similar to the control room server with 4-core Intel Xeon processor, 8 gig, 500 gigabyte, and as you can see, SQL Server 2014, Service Pack 1 or newer that's required. So that's kind of the minimum that we recommend to have in place for your Automation Anywhere on-premise platform when it comes to A2019. And again, Windows is not going to be the only option moving forward. There will be an option to use Linux. The operating systems that are supported, in a nutshell, both 32-bit and 64-bit operating systems are supported. It works on premises, it works on AWS, it works on Azure. So if you're looking for any of the public clouds to install it there on an infrastructure as a service piece, then more than happy for you to do so. Server 2016 standard and data center are the minimum that is required from an operating point of view, operating system point of view. Good. Once you've got the machines obviously in place, you've got all your specs done, the next part is really looking at the user accounts that you will require for the installation. And for the installation, you will need a service account that has local admin privileges. They will be used for the control room and the bot insight service logon. It could be a local account if you don't have a control room that's connected to Active Directory, or the main account where control room is connected to AD. We also support, since version 11.3, we also support multi-forest, multi-domain integrations. So, for example, if you have different forests per country, that is absolutely fine, absolutely works well. Make sure you identify the appropriate machines that the control room and that the client needs to be installed on, the service account that's to be used for ID authentication. We do recommend to have the password to set to never expire, and essentially to circumvent any problems that could stem from password changes being forgotten, not made to the service account. Obviously, that will, at the end of the day, always depend on the security policies that your customer has in place, and it might be required that you need to change your password. So when it comes to the governance piece of the Automation Anywhere platform, then do make sure, if those things are in place, that you have a policy in place that incorporates that into the operation manual. So if passwords ever change for service accounts, that they are also being changed for this particular service account. Also make sure that you always identify who will, at the end of the day, be the users that will be using the clients. So for those, the machine logon is possible with user accounts, service accounts to be used, so make sure that's all in place. From a permissions point of view, we're gonna require read and write permissions to a couple of pieces. One is the application path for the client, to the public documents path for the client, to the broken data folder for control room, and obviously the installation location. So that's kind of the minimum that is required. The Automation Anywhere service should really have full access rights to the Automation Anywhere folder, so the installation path. The account that then is used to actually run those services will require you to have local admin rights, at least during the installation. You will need to have the rights and permissions to log on as a service and allow log on locally. If you do use a SQL connection, make sure it's configured with either Windows authentication or database authentication. So there's two different options. And as always, if you install any kind of major enterprise software, do make sure that this is also being considered as part of your antivirus policies, and make sure that the Automation Anywhere .exe files are marked as an allowed file during that. Okay, Then on to the ports. I think that's pretty straightforward. Most of those ports, with the exception of the top two, port 80 and 443, are essentially hard-coded, so they can't be changed. During the installation, you'll be able to change the HTTP and HTTPS ports if you need to. This is for the clients to access through the web browser. All the other ports that you see for cluster messaging, caching, Elasticsearch, all of these are not changeable. They are fixed. So what you see here on the screen, 5672 for cluster messaging, is the port that's actually used in a single server installation. If you have high availability requirements, then you will also need to look at ports 47500, 47600 to 47600, and 47100 to 47200. Again, Elasticsearch on the other end is also not changeable. So these are the minimum ports that need to be available for communication between the different machines and the different clients and the machines. Okay, then on to the database. SQL database will require a static port in SQL. Dynamic ports are not supported during the installation. That will actually be checked. The port itself, the static port by default is 1433, but that can be changed. That is not hard-coded, so to speak. We ensure that the database has sysadmin rights to create the database and its tables. If you are creating a dedicated SQL user or using an existing user, do provide that with sysadmin privileges to the control room and the inside database. If you require this to be pre-installed or manually configured by those databases, you need to have the DB owner rights for both control room and bot insides. The sysadmin role can be revoked after the install, so that is required during installation. After installation, that can be revoked if you need to. From a browser point of view, obviously make sure that the web server URL is trusted in Internet Explorer and also in other settings in the browser. Make sure that it prompts for user credentials for logon. This is predominantly for testing purposes in case there's any issues launching the control room on the first attempt. That will definitely help with your testing. We do support Visual SVN for Subversion in A2019. You will also know that, or if you have worked with it already, you'll probably know that there is versioning also included in the platform. And in terms of the certification for the installation, you must make sure that you have a .pfx certificate. This is important. If you have any other format that needs you to or requires you to port this to PFX, so please make sure you double check on that. I'm not going to go through the next two parts. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. If you're looking for high availability, you've got to make sure that the certificate is issued to the load balancer DNS name, and the individual URLs that you need to be accessing, they all have nodes added to the subject alternative name field for the certificate. So I think everyone who's done similar setups before is pretty much familiar with those. I think it's pretty straightforward. All right, let's move on to the actual installation. As I mentioned earlier, when you go through the installation, you need to make sure that you have admin rights to do that. So run the installation file as an administrator, which will then take you through very common screens where you will be welcome to the installation. You click next, it will present you with the enterprise license agreement. As always, everyone makes sure that they obviously read it or something along those lines. Always encourage you to read it if you need it. Do accept the terms in the license agreement if you agree with them. Click next and the actual installation configuration starts. So there's now two options that you will be facing. Starting from left to right, and the two options on the left-hand side as an installation type are an express installation, which is ideal if you run a POC, if you want to install something on a development machine, on a training machine that you're going to use that doesn't need high availability, that doesn't need a lot of configuration or customization on that end. It will basically install everything with default parameters, so there's no changes to that. And will also have SQL installed on the same machine. So very easy, straightforward setup. Again, recommend this for any training purposes, educational purposes for yourself, test machines, possibly development machines, these kind of things. Now it gets a bit more, I wouldn't say complicated, but a bit more customizable is obviously the custom installation. So if you're looking at scenarios where you need separate servers, high availability and so on, the custom one gives you full control over all the installation parameters. So you would use that over the Express edition. That's usually the process you go through for a productive system. The destination folder, you can obviously change that. So if you're not happy with Program Files Automation Anywhere Enterprise, you can always push that into a different folder if you need to. So that's pretty straightforward, I guess. Not much to explain here, really. What it then takes you to is the cluster configuration. And again, this is part of the second installation, a custom installation option. So this will give you the option to create your cluster, provide the IP addresses of all the control room servers that you will have. Make sure they're separated by a comma. So you'll see that in that screenshot as well, separate IP addresses with a comma. So if you have 2, 3, 4 control rooms in place, do make sure that they're in there and they're separated. The local IP address, you will probably recognize that if you've used version 11 before and installed it, you'll probably recognize this. This will be used for Elasticsearch. So it will source pretty much automatically the IP addresses that this server has, and you will need to select the local IP in the drop-down. Now then, moving on to TLS and the configuration of the certificates. In most productive environments, you will obviously not check the self-signed certificate box. This is usually used, again, similar to the Express installation, in environments where you either just test, you develop, use it as a training, essentially a single server installation. That's when you would tick the self-signed certificate box. In normal productive environments, you would normally untick that box, point it to the certificate, provide the private key password, potentially change the ports for HTTP and HTTPS depending on what the settings are within your customer's environment. But again, the self-signed certificate is really to avoid buying additional certificates for machines that aren't used in a productive environment where you only have training requirements or development requirements. Okay, moving on, similar to the TLS screen, you will have to provide the service credentials. You can use the local system account. That is absolutely not a problem, but that is used when the database is on the same server. So again, similar to the Express installation, choose the local system account if everything is in the same server, on the same server. If your SQL server is remote, you do need to specify a service account. There's not a way around it because otherwise they won't be able to communicate with each other. In that case, you will also be then able to specify the database server, which is the server name / the instance that you're going to use. If you're choosing the Express installation, you will not be able to choose anything in the database server dropdown. So don't be surprised if this is grayed out and you can't select anything here. You will then be able to select between the Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication and give the database a name. By the way, you'll probably notice that the name of the control room database only requires you to specify one, because there's only one database in A2019 compared to version 11, where there's 6. There's 1 for the control room, 1 for Pod Insight, and then 4 for the BI visualization and the metadata around that, essentially. So Pod Insight is in Elasticsearch. There's only 1 database for control room in A2019, which makes everyone's lives a lot easier. Good. When you're ready to install Automation Anywhere, you basically just hit the install button and it will do a couple of checks. So it will add all the different services, obviously create the databases where needed. It will make sure that all the Automation Anywhere services are started successfully. You will probably notice that there's a few services that you might be used to from version 11 that are kind of missing here. They're not missing. We just streamlined everything. We made it smaller from a footprint point of view and merged some of the different services. Good point to check here, and the system will actually tell you during the installation if there is any leftovers from a previous version 11 installation. Some customers or partners do go through that and basically put the same thing, put A2019 on the same server that they had version 11 on, especially when it comes to development environments or test environments. Do make sure you have a clean uninstall of version 11. Specifically, the Elasticsearch service will fail if there was no clean uninstall of version 11, because it will check some of those references and will probably still find some of the files relating to an older version. So do make sure that this is completely uninstalled and a clean uninstall. The system will tell you anyway, so the installation will put its hand up and say, hey, there's something wrong, and that's usually the first thing that we see. Okay, once you're done with that, congratulations. You've just completed your first installation. So now you can actually launch Automation Anywhere Enterprise. When you click Finish and you launch Automation Anywhere Enterprise, it's gonna now take you through the configuration of the control room. And for that, we've provided a short video. So hopefully this will come through. Let me just put up a new share. I'll just quickly stop this and share my screen with sound. And hopefully that will come through okay.
Okay. So when we launch the control room first time, we will get this screen. So basically this screen is to configure the control room first time. So the repository path is nothing but when we upload a task to the control room, those task files are saved on this location. So this is the default path. C program data. Just a minute, sorry. Just a minute. Just a minute. Okay. So this is the default path where the repository location, C program data automation anywhere server files. Now this can be customized. If it is standalone installations, we can move to the any of the other drive, D drive, E drive, any drive. For example, if you have a HS setup, then we require to have a NAS or SAN drive. Basically, that's shared locations which should be accessible from all the control room server within the environment. For example, you have a 2 control room server in a HS setup. There would be an additional hardware required for the shared repository locations that should be accessible from both the control room servers. For example, if we put that repository on one of the location, then it required a UNC path to be configured here, and that server goes down. To avoid that conditions for the outage and the downtime, better to have a shared locations, which is NAS or SAN drive. It's a storage area network or network area storage. This control room access URL, if it is standalone installations, then we require to have the local URL which contains the FQDN of the control room server, including the port number. If it is the default port 8443, that doesn't require to be mentioned. Otherwise, we also require to mention that port as well. For example, there is a HA setup, then here we need to provide the load balancer URL so that the traffic can be routed via this URL, and that can be distributed on all the control room servers behind the load balancer. So here I'm going to configure this as a default location, as a repository path. And the control room URL contains, so my installation done with the 80 port. That's the reason we cannot see the port. Otherwise, if there is a customized port, we need to provide like this, colon and the port number. So next step would be the credential vault settings. We have a two connection mode for the credential vault. One is express, second is manual. So express mode means when you launch the control room, you will get the login screen directly and need to enter the credentials to get into the control room. For the manual mode, it's like a two-layer of authentication. First, you see the blank rectangle box where you need to provide this master key, which is at the bottom of the screen, that you require to be copy and paste somewhere in the notepad file. Now, this is very sensitive key. So we need to ensure that 2-3 more copies should be created as a notepad file, and one of them should be keep on the shared locations, which is under local IT's backup policy. Because, for example, this key will be misplaced or deleted, there is no way to regenerate. This key will be saved in the database with the 2-layer of encryptions, so even we cannot regenerate through the database or somewhere else. So this required to be copy and paste within the notepad file, and we need to have more copies on that and to put one of them copy under backup rotation shared location. So I'm going here with the express mode. Okay, so there are 3 types of authentications for the Automation Anywhere control room. One is AD, second is SSO, and third is control room database, which also we known as the non-AD. So AD required domain controller FQDN, which has a global catalog role is running with the default port 3268 should be listened. If it is LDAP-S, then 3269. There is a possibility that Active Directory already configured by the customer end with the another port, so that is also fine. This is all depends on the port, but these are the default 3268 and 3269. So here we need to provide the domain username in format of universal principal name, UPN. So it's like looks like an email address, like username@domainname.com, and we need to provide the password here, so that these 2 buttons will be enabled: manually add connections and discover connections. So manually add connections means we need to add the domain controller FQDN, which has a global catalog role is running manually, like LDAP:// and the FQDN of that server. The discover connections will discover connection automatically by taking the machine domain and authenticate with the user account, which we enter in about 2 fields. And it will communicate through LDAP/S channel with the Active Directory, and we'll get a response back and will provide us how many domains are part of that forest or Active Directory. Second option would be the single sign-on that required IDP server to be set up at the infrastructure level. So this would be like we need to provide the SAML metadata and the unique entity ID. So first we need to provide this thing to the IDP server, and IDP server will generate the metadata, and we need to provide here. So it's a kind of shake hands between the IDP server and the control room. So yes, The Automation Anywhere supports different type of SAML 2.0 protocol like Microsoft ADFS, Okta, and other NLB as well. So any options we can choose here. Now there is a prerequisites from the Microsoft ADFS side. If you would like to configure this option with the Microsoft ADFS, then the web application should be configured with the HTTPS only. With the HTTP, you cannot configure the SSO using the Microsoft ADFS. Third option would be like control room database. So it is allow you to create the generic user ID and the passwords, and this will be stored in the control room database. The username will be in the open text within the database, but password will be encrypted. So I'm going to choose that option, control room database. So this is first control room administrator we need to create. So the username, email, and the password fields are mandatory, and the first name, last name, and description are optional. Once you enter those details, you need to set the security question answer with the choices like anything. This will help you to recover the password in case you forget. So it is important when you set this security question answer, please note down somewhere else. So once you set the security question answer, we need to save and log in. The moment you click on save and log in, all the details are saved in the database, and this screen will never come again to configure it. So we need to collect those details before we start first time configurations so that we can have those details ready at the time of configuration.
Okay. That basically concludes that process. So we've now gone through the installation. We've gone through the initial setup of control room, configured our admin, configured our security questions for that user, and configured the setup of the authentication that's going to be used for our control room and for our Automation Anywhere setup. Because this is a really level 200 webinar, so it gives you a good idea, hopefully, on the first installation that you can get from onto your development machine, your test environment. Little call to action as a follow-up. I would encourage you, if you haven't had any hands-on experience with A2019 yet, do head over to the partner portal and get to the Get Trained option and go through the Hello A2019 bot course that gives you a very good short introduction. I say short because it's I think about an hour roughly into building your first bot with A2019. In terms of resources, if you now want to go off and play around with it, get your first installation done, the partner portal does contain the installation files for all the different versions that we have. So I encourage you, head over there, get the installation files, and start installing it on your own local machines, possibly. Also check the webinar, content on the partner portal. There's regular updates to that. We have a new section under events and webinars where you'll see all the different webinars coming down the pipeline over the next couple of months, obviously. So do sign up for the next couple of webinars. I'll have a quick check if there's anything in the Q&A box. There's no questions by the looks of it. Let's just quickly go into the chat. See, it seems to be all good. Perfect. Good. Then thank you for your time tonight, my time, morning actually, 1 o'clock here in London. If you have any more questions, do reach out to your local partner success manager. If you don't know who that is, if you go to the partner portal, you'll find the name in the top right-hand side and their contact details. So please reach out to them if you have any more questions, need any assistance, any guidance, or any guidance into the right direction with additional content. There was one question quickly coming through. Can we use server instead of, sorry, can we use 2019 server instead of 2016? At the moment, it's 2016 that's supported. I will double check for you tomorrow first thing my morning to confirm what the plans are on 2019. There's another question around Imagine in 2020. If you head over to our Automation Anywhere website, you'll actually find, at least for London, that has been announced. So the London Imagine in 2020 is going to be in April 8th and 9th, followed by then the other events as usual, which will be announced closer to their dates. I don't have the exact dates for that yet. The only Imagine we've announced so far is Imagine in London. So maybe I'll see one or two of you over there, hopefully. All right, and thanks. I hope this was informative for you guys. Again, if you want to share this, if you want to rewatch it, head over to the partner portal. You'll find a copy over there. And with that, thanks for joining and have a good day. I'll see you soon. Thank you.